What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we have a fun one. I sat down and made a model this offseason, not the RS grades, which is my prospect model, but I was messing around and I wanted to make a model that would take into account a player's RS grade, their year one output, so like points per game, yards per outrun, targets per outrun, PFF grade, and spit out a year two point per game projection, pretty much just based on talent, profile, all of that. Now, what I will say, I'm not 100% happy with it yet. Like, it's not fine-tuned all the way. Like, I didn't get to spend a ton of time on it. I still want to go over it and make it better. So that's not behind the paywall or anything. We're just going to look at that today. And I figure, it's June. It's looking like redraft season is happening here. We're looking at ADPs. We're making rankings. I just got done making my first rankings on the Patreon. So why not talk ourselves in to 6 year two wide receivers to draft before they break out? Because who doesn't like some early offseason year two wide receiver breakout talk? So with all that being said, if you enjoy at any point, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm pretty cool. My nitty bag.
So let's just talk through the model real quick, right? Again, I didn't want to let this go to waste. This is just something fun we did in the offseason. I just want to see if we can extract anything from it that tells us anything about this upcoming season, because we can look at team level stuff and projections and look at, pass attempts and all of that. But I think it's a good angle, instead of going super macro from a team level, to go, micro and just draft the good players. So how does the model work? Let's look at the inputs real quick. And of course, we got all the inputs right here. I don't know anybody else that's out here that is sharing with you the inputs, the ins and outs of all of their models. But first, we have the RS prospect grade, which we had, that's 25% of the model. We've talked about this all offseason. RS grades, Ron Stewart grades, you get a grade from 0 through 10, and it just projects how good you're going to be in the NFL. You have anything that's a grade of 10 over as legendary, then elite, gold, silver, bronze, all the way down. Then we also have year one points per game, which is self-explanatory, just PPR points per game in year one yards per outrun, which is an efficiency metric. We have year one pass DVOA, which is interesting. Pass DVOA is essentially a Football Outsiders offensive efficiency stat. So it takes into account how good was your offense, right? Because if your offense was bad, then you're likely, sort of rising above circumstances. If your offense was good, then maybe you had some competition next to you. Just a good thing to factor in there. We have year one PFF grade, so that's just your receiving grade on PFF. We've seen that has been something that is really indicative of future success. Anybody that had like over an 80 their rookie year usually end up being studs. And then we also have total targets and total routes. I didn't really love using volume-based stats, right? Just raw targets and raw routes. But when I was testing these stats, they looked pretty good. I think that there is something to the traps of kind of like Kadarius Toney last year, where yes, in small sample, he looked good on a yards per outrun basis, but was he on the field? Was he running a lot of routes? Did he get that experience? No, not really. Now, I will say, I wanted to add in targets per outrun and expected points per game, which is just your volume based on your targets and everything. How many points should you have put up? Neither of those really helped the model. So they didn't make the model. Total routes and total targets made it in over them. And this is what we get, right? Those outputs or those inputs then give you this. This is your outputs. Now, again, prospect tier is just RS grade, right? So like legendary, elite, gold, silver, bronze not showed here, but this is what we end up with. This is our top 25 wide receivers since 2009, sorted by their year two point per game projection from my model. And we could see it really liked Jefferson, Odell Beckham, Jamar Chase. It had them all projected for 20-plus points per game. Only Justin Jefferson kind of didn't hit that mark, but it's pretty close, especially with these guys that are like 14.95 points per game projection and above. Like, it got pretty close. Like, I have their actual year two points per game here on this chart, then their year two point per game projection, which is an output from the model. Comparing that, what's the absolute value of their difference? So how close was the model? And pretty much until you get down to like CeeDee Lamb, it's pretty dang close across the board. Now, of course, it's not going to be perfect, but I tested that all the way down. For qualifying wide receivers, you need to have a certain amount of routes ran and everything, and it's pretty good. It has an average of 2.5 points per game off the actual year two points per game. So it can either overshoot it by 2.5, it can go under it by 2.5, but it usually falls within that range, which I think is like pretty solid, right? It gets us a feel of what we can kind of expect from these guys in year two. Now, the moment of truth is, does this outperform year 1 points per game. Like, you can just look at year 1 points per game, and then that can correlate to year 2 points per game, and that does that pretty well for you. But I wanted to add a little bit more context to that, which is why we added to year 1 points per game with prospect profile, offensive efficiency, targets per out run, or not targets per out run, but yards per out run, all of that stuff. And this is what the moment of truth tells us. We did a correlation between actual year 2 points per game, and then that first graph on the left-hand side is year 2 point per game projection compared to actual year 2 points per game. The one on the right is year 1 points per game to actual year 2 points per game. And we get a sizable advantage here, right? We have like a R squared of in the 0.6s on the left-hand side. What's that? 0.655. And then on the right-hand side, a R squared of 0.527. So both are pretty strong, but the year 2 points per game model does beat out year 1 points per game. So it's a better indicator of year 2 success than year 1 points per game, which is the important part of this entire thing. Now, moving on from that, we have the model in place. Ron, how does that help us with the 2022 class? Well, we ran the 2022 class through the year 2 point per game model or projection point per game model, and there's some interesting takeaways here. What I did is I took every single player's year 2 point per game projection. We sorted it by that, right, for all of our 22 wide receivers that qualified. And then we have their positional ADP on Underdog. So Garrett Wilson's the wide receiver 9 right now. Drake London's the wide receiver 24. Chris Olave's the wide receiver 12. And then I used those positional ADPs. And I took, so for instance, with Garrett Wilson, I took the wide receiver 9 in points per game from the last 5 years, averaged them all together, and that is the points per game. So 17 points per game has been your average wide receiver 9 overall over these last 5 years. Same with Drake London. So your average wide receiver 24 overall in points per game has been 14 points per game. Now, I will say it's not an exact science, right? Like if Garrett Wilson was to hit 16.65 points per game, it's like roughly where you want to be at wide receiver 9. So these projections are just like the last 5-year point per games aren't an exact science or exact goal of what we're looking for. But I think it's a good way to just have every wide receiver have a set point that they should try and hit, and then see where the value is, right? Where we compare their projection to their ADP projection, right? So we have the year 2 RS grade projection with the green column here, and then we're comparing that to their ADP point per game projection just based on, wide receiver 9, wide receiver 24, wide receiver 12, how many points should they put up? And then we find the value, right? So we just divide them by each other, and we kind of see, right? So Garrett Wilson is projected for about like 98% of what you can expect him for. Drake London actually overshoots that 1.02. Now, I will say, like, you're looking at Drake London, it's like, okay, Drake London is 2% over what he's expected for. Again, that's not the exact like calculation there. Every year is different in terms of points per game. Like 14 points per game this year might be like the wide receiver 18 instead of 24. Really what it comes down to is just putting them all in the same playing field and seeing who sticks out. So to me, anybody that is in green is a good value per ADP. Anybody that is in red is a bad value per ADP. And that's pretty much what you can gain from this chart. Now, what I will say is nobody's really a terrible bet as a year 2 wide receiver. Like, even though Olave looks pretty rough there, Christian Watson, Jamison Williams, year 2 wide receivers are one of the best upside bets you could possibly have. It just means that these guys are pretty much priced at their ceiling already, and there's not a lot of value there. I kind of want to talk about the 6 year 2 wide receivers that are values and getting a little bit slept on here. Now, our first wide receiver we're going to talk through is Garrett Wilson. Now, obviously, this isn't a guy that is like unknown or unheard of or, some steel type wide receiver is a breakout wide receiver, but we're going to get more expensive as we go. Garrett Wilson is the 202 currently on Underdog. By the way, if you're not already on Underdog, make sure you're on there. I'll have a link at the top of the description. I'll have a link at the top of the comments down below, pinned at the top. There'll be a link. You click it. It'll take you to Underdog Fantasy. It'll use promo code RON. It'll match your deposit up to $100. And what Underdog Fantasy is, it's a best ball platform. You draft your teams on there. You draft them. You don't have to worry about them again. It's best ball. They set the lineups every single time. I have like 200 lineups already or 200 teams already for 2023. And like when week 4 comes around, I don't have to set lineups. I don't have to, set waiver wire stuff. It just is all ready to go. It's a great way to prepare for your redraft leagues in August, your home leagues, all of that. You get in these underdog streets where there's money on the line with people that are really experienced. And you're essentially, Broccoli from Naruto, where you have all the weights on you and you come into your home league ready to rip. You take the weights off and you see, oh, Chris Olave is the wide receiver 12 on Underdog, but I go to my home league and I'm getting him in like the wide receiver 20s. That's an absolute steal. You can just go in there and dominate your draft. So again, promo code Ron will get your deposit match up to $100. Check out Underdog Fantasy. Now, when we're talking about Garrett Wilson, the reason I wanted to bring him up is he's a second-round pick. He goes to the 202 on Underdog as the wide receiver 9. And I think people are going to be a little bit spooked by that, right? This is a guy who finished as the wide receiver 30 in points per game last year, wasn't even a wide receiver 2, and now you're drafting him as a back-end wide receiver 1. Like, this has to be too expensive, which I think is fair, and it's a valid argument. But to me, I think the price is pretty much fair at this point, right? We're looking at his year 2 projection here, 16.65 points per game, and that was based off of last year's offense, right? Again, it took into account the really bad offensive DVOA, which actually took things down a little bit. And I think I explained that poorly earlier. With the offensive DVOA, offensive efficiency with Football Outsiders, you want that to be good, right? Because if it's good and you're actually out there putting up points, competing, then it kind of has a competition level, like multiplier to it. But if you did well in a bad offense, it's kind of empty volume, if that makes sense. So Garrett Wilson got pulled back by his offensive DVOA. His projection still comes out pretty close to wide receiver 9, and now he's going to be in a much, much better offense with Aaron Rodgers on this Jets team. And that year 2 projection, even for a guy that had a pretty awful offensive environment, it is the 10th highest year 2 projection of all time in this database here, right? You're looking here, you have like Jefferson, Odell Beckham, of course, Jamar Chase, Mark Cooper, AJ Green, Julio Jones, AJ Brown, Sammy Watkins, Jalen Waddle, Garrett Wilson. And a lot of these guys are in that, like, 17 plus point per game area, 16 plus point per game area, which would be like back end wide receiver 1s. He's also the 3rd highest elite wide receiver prospect of all time in terms of year 2 projection, behind just AJ Brown and Jalen Waddle. He is a stud. He's being drafted at wide receiver 9. Wide receiver 9 has averaged about 17 points per game over the last 5 seasons. He should be right in that area with Aaron Rodgers. So to me, he's not a screaming value. He's not somebody that you're sleeping on or anything. I just want to put it out there. That early second, it feels like a lot. Wide receiver 9, it feels like a lot. But I think it is a fine price. The talent is there. He had the 6th highest PFF grade of all time in my database for a rookie wide receiver. His 16-game pace of 131 targets, second most of my entire database. By the way, because we're using total targets and raw routes, I have to adjust any wide receiver in the last 2 years that have played 17 games so that they're not getting a leg up on the 16-game guys. It's annoying, but it has to be done. He also had 14.7 expected points per game, which is just his volume on targets. It factors out QB play, second all-time among rookie wide receivers in my database. And now he gets a massive spike in efficiency from Aaron Rodgers, and even somebody that is very, very conservative when it comes to projections, right? This video, we're zooming in micro on players that are talented. Mike Clay does the opposite. He goes team level tendencies. He looks at the schedules. How pass heavy should this team be historically? What is Aaron Rodgers' touchdown rate, his targets, where do they get distributed? And from that, he came to the conclusion that he has Garrett Wilson as his wide receiver 9. He's super conservative again, and he has him at wide receiver 9, which is at his ADP. And this is a guy who had a 24.9% target share last year. Devontae Adams has had like 30% plus target share seasons with Aaron Rodgers. Mike Clay has Garrett Wilson at the wide receiver 9 with just a 22% target share. To me, that is his absolute floor of target share. So if that comes up, there's so much wiggle room here for him to exceed that, challenge for top 5 numbers. If he gets, 28% target share, you're looking at a top 5-ish type wide receiver. There's a lot to like here. Aaron Rodgers throws a lot of touchdowns on a low amount of attempts. There's really nobody else in that passing game that's really challenging Garrett Wilson for anything. He's going against Sauce Gardner, getting better every day in practice. Again, he's not the screaming value or steal that you need to, put your friends onto, but his price is not overvalued. I think it's fair at that, early second wide receiver 9, back end wide receiver 1 type price tag. Now, moving on from that, we'll get a little bit deeper here. We have Drake London, who on our 2022 class chart comes in second highest, right ahead of Olave, and he is projected for 14.35 points per game in the model. His ADP would have him at 14 points per game, so he's a good value when it comes to just like his talent level versus his price. Now, when we take Drake London and Chris Olave, they pretty much have the same identical year 2 point per game projection, right? They're both in that 14 point per game area, yet London goes a full 2 rounds after Olave. Now, of course, there is a reason for this. Olave's quarterback is Derek Carr. He's going to be on an offense that should be at league average in pass attempts, whereas London's quarterback, instead of it being Carr, is Desmond Ridder. It's Taylor Heineke. It's on an offense that projects to be really run heavy. So he's cheaper. And that makes sense. But my point is that that's baked in, right? Him and Olave are similar talent bets. Dynasty, they go right next to each other. And if Drake London and Chris Olave swap spots, London would also be a second-round pick. So why not just take the discount and take him in the late fourth when his talent suggests that he belongs there? The offense is already baked in. All of the downside is already kind of baked in, whereas usually when a 8th overall wide receiver has as dominant of a year one as Drake London, they're really expensive in year two. We're getting a discount because of the offense, and the issue is we're not all that good at projecting offenses, right? Now, again, Falcons are assumed to be league bottom in pass attempts. Even if they were just in like the 20s, right? If they were just like 20 to like 25th in pass attempts, London probably pays off. There's also the idea that Marcus Mariota was pretty awful last year. Mariota's going to be gone. Desmond Ridder is in. The games with Desmond Ridder last year, they had 29 pass attempts per game. Without him, with Mariota, they were at 23, so they look to want to pass a little bit more with Desmond Ridder. There's upside at quarterback as well, where Marcus Mariota was pretty awful. Desmond Ridder is likely not a great quarterback or anything, but he is an unknown. So what if Desmond Ridder has some untapped upside and is actually good, right? That's a pretty huge thing. And then also, Desmond Ridder should at least be a boost, a step up, whatever you want to call it, from Marcus Mariota. Like, this is a pretty brutal tweet here from Jacob Gibbs. You're looking at highest off-target rates in 2022. You had Kyle Pitts at 29%, Drake London at 19%, both of them like in the top 6 here among all receivers, tight ends and wide receivers. Just absolutely wild. Mariota was one of the most wildly inaccurate quarterbacks last year. Anything would be an upgrade. Now, we are also, again, not that good at projecting pass attempts. Again, Arthur Smith has his tendencies, everything, whatever, but things happen, things change. It's the NFL. This is a really good tweet or good chart from @ANellylytics on Twitter. He's somebody I co-manage a Devy team with. He's somebody that's really bright. And these are the raw pass attempts per game for every single team from 2012 through 2021. So I know it's an old chart, but it just goes to show nothing really stays all that the same in the NFL, right? Like, this is a mess. Year-to-year pass attempt numbers are not sticky whatsoever on a team level. They go up, they go down, things happen on defense, coaches change. There's a million different things that happen. It's pretty random year to year. You can, project the Falcons to be towards league bottom in pass attempts, but again, if they just, pass in like the 20th, 25th pass attempts area, Drake London likely, pays off. So let's say the public is right. The volume stays league bottom with the Falcons. How does Drake London win? There's still an out to that bet in my eyes, right? Wide receivers can beat low pass volume with efficiency, touchdowns, market share. Drake London has all of that, right? Talent breeds efficiency. He is a very talented wide receiver. He was 77th percentile versus zone on reception perception, 71st first man, 69th first press, and he had some glowing reviews from Matt Harmon. This is a blurb from receptionperception.com. Matt Harmon does great work over there, and this is his blurb on Drake London. He says, Drake London has it all. He brings size, fluidity, and ball tracking you want in a prototypical starting X-wide receiver. His technical prowess and overall ability to get open is what makes him extremely enticing. His rookie year success rates are similar to other future star-level big receivers like early career Mike Evans, Allen Robinson, Michael Thomas. The last player was my pre-draft and is still my favorite comparison for London. So he really likes Michael Thomas as a comparison for Drake London, which is nice. And he said, I'm an ardent defender of Arthur Smith's offensive concepts and believe their extreme run-heavy tendencies during the Marcus Mariota games was a mirage born of necessity. London is well set up to succeed in the system. We still don't know how good Desmond Ridder is or will be, but he and London found an easy connection in the final chapter of the rookie seasons. Either way, reception perception shows that Drake London has all the tools in the world to be a star at the NFL level. A big receiver who gets open at this rate is hard to deny. So that is a really glowing review. He also touched on the offensive thing where they're likely not as run heavy in a no Marcus Mariota offense. And then also Desmond Ridder, you can feel whatever you feel about Desmond Ridder. There's an aspect of unknown to Desmond Ridder, which has upside for him to actually be good. Like kind of like how Arthur Smith kind of like whispered or like QB whispered his way into Ryan Tannehill being good last year. We could see something similar with or not Ryan Tannehill last year, but early days in Tennessee. We could see something similar with Desmond Ridder here. And when we talk about efficiency, Drake London has it. Even on a terrible offense, All of his targets were off target. He was 14th in yards per route run as a rookie last year, which is crazy. He was 29.4% target share guy, which was 5th among all wide receivers. He was 18th in red zone targets as a rookie at 6'4". So red zone targets are already there. He can score touchdowns with his big size. He's going to get a huge market share of this offense, even if it's low volume. He had a 29.4% target share last year, and he was 14th in yards per route run, which means he should be efficient. Now, again, there's lots of outs to this bet. The offense is baked in. It's priced in. This is somebody that could be a, A.J. Brown in Tennessee, like low volume, just big efficiency, big touchdown type of year 2 breakout. Now, after that, we have George Pickens, Treylon Burks, and Jahan Dotson. It is I don't know. I was going to say a three-way, but I don't know. I wish I had something. It was, not a tandem, not a threesome, but a group of 3 guys here that I like. And when we look here, they are actually all bunched in, right? So we're looking at Pickens, Jahan Dotson, Treylon Burks, and Christian Watson. Christian Watson not listed here because he's much more expensive than the other guys, right? He is going at the wide receiver 20 ahead of Drake London, actually. Now, I don't think Christian Watson is inherently a bad pick. I just think, again, he's priced at his ceiling. Now, when we look here at Pickens, Jahan Dotson, Treylon Burks, they're all green. They're all, in spots where, wide receiver 38 to wide receiver 40 for, like, sexy year 2 breakouts. Those are really, really fine prices, right? Right now, right now, all 3 of them are going in the 7th round, wide receiver 38 to wide receiver 40, which is a really, really nice price because I think that one of the 3 are going to end up smashing this year. Now, when we zoom out a little bit and look at kind of like what other wide receivers have similar projections to these guys, this is a list of wide receivers that are in that like 10 to 13 year 2 point per game projection area. And I just wanted to see, right, again, George Pickens, Jahan Dotson, Treylon Burks to pay off at like wide receiver 38 to 40, or they're assumed somewhere in that like 11 point per game area. But there's a lot of upside here, right? We're looking at a lot of wide receivers in this range, projected in this range, really overshooting that 11 point per game projection, right? Again, let me actually just bring up that 2022 chart one more time, right? So you can see their ADP point per game projection for Pickens, Jahan Dotson, Burks, all around 11 points per game. For them to really pay off, they probably need to get in at like, 13 plus, 14 plus. And what I'm trying to show is that there is upside for that. Of course, there's downside, right? We have Judy here. We have Laviska Shenault. I'm just showing where they're bunched around these other wide receivers that had similar year 2 projections. They can kind of go either way. Like, there's huge smashes here, right? Allen Robinson, 19 points per game. You have Austin Collie. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown last year. You have Tyreek Hill in his second year. You have Terry McLaurin, Stephon Diggs in their second years. Martavis Bryant, DeAndre Hopkins. Kendall Wright was even pretty decent in his year 2. Mike Wallace, Alshon Jeffrey towards the bottom here. Cortland Sutton, Deontay Johnson. Like, I do genuinely think that 1 or 2 of these guys is priced at that, like, 11 point per game projection. But there's a really big, error bar here where some of them, might end up being Laviska Shenault, where they end up with like 8 points per game. And 1 or 2 of these guys might end up being league winners with like 14, 15, 16 points per game. And on top of that, again, 7th round ADP. And we have guys here where we look at this list. We have Rashad Bateman. Just in terms of year 2 wide receivers last year, you have Rashad Bateman, who's actually had a lower year 2 point per game projection than all of these guys, right? You have him a little bit lower at like 11.21 point per game projection last year. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is a little bit higher. But all of them are in similar spots. They're all similar bets heading into year 2, right? Where Bateman was a late first, so was like Treylon Burks and Jahan Dotson. Pickens, a year 2 guy. Amon-Ra St. Brown, weird calculus, is like a day 3 guy that had a good year 1. But all of them have similar year 2 projections from the model standpoint. Yet, Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens are all 7th round picks. Last year, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Rashad Bateman were both 5th round picks. Now, of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown absolutely smashed that value. Rashad Bateman, not so much. But what I'm trying to say is these 3 wide receivers in Pickens, Jahan Dotson, and Treylon Burks are similar bets to Amon-Ra St. Brown and Rashad Bateman from last year, but they're priced 2 rounds too cheap. I imagine by August and the hype trains on these year 2 wide receivers get drawn up, I think we're going to see guys like Pickens, Dotson, or Burks. I think 1 or 2 of these guys are going to get priced up into like the 5th, 6th round. People are going to fall in love. My guess, I don't know. People do love Pickens. There's different hives for all 3 of these guys, but I think when we look, back in like August, I think these guys are going to be more like 6th round, 5th round type picks when, the wide receiver craze comes around. You see like a George Pickens one-handed catch in camp. So I think that these guys are really, really good values right now. When we talk about their, who do I prefer between them? I'd say all three of them are good values. Again, if you have your preference, everybody kind of has their flavor of this group of three wide receivers. But if you put, me on the spot here, I'd probably prefer Pickens or Burks out of them. This is from the rookie wide receiver report last week of the season. Treylon Burks has a 20.9% targets per out run, so he's earning targets at a much higher rate than Pickens and Dotson, who were both under 15%. His 1.75 yards per out run made him more efficient than Dotson and Pickens. Really, Dotson's redeeming quality here is that he had a better PFF grade than Treylon Burks, but still both in like that low 70s area, which is pretty decent. So yeah, give me Burks. He has upside with that big frame, elite wide receiver prospect in the RS grades. He was a first-round pick. Should be a low-volume offense in Tennessee, but Tannehill's still going to be there. He's still a good quarterback. And, like, Burks might lead that team in targets, which is really interesting. Now, I will say the second guy that I would put here if I was to, like, rank the three of them, let's actually put Burks here at the top. We'll like, rank them here live. Next up, though, we'll put Jahan Dotson at 2. And the reason for that is his PFF grade is better than Pickens. It's a little bit easier to kind of see how he, like, pays off than Pickens. And then he also just absolutely smashed reception perception, which, again, Matt Harmon does great work. Jahan Dotson versus man and zone wasn't amazing, right? 60th percentile, 64th percentile, 87th percentile against press at his size of sub 185 is really, really strong. His entire route tree success by route was green, above average in literally everything besides the flat route. So I don't think that's really even a route. He's somebody that looks kind of like your Deontay Johnson year 2 type breakout, where he's going to be a really good route runner. Gets open, gets separation. I don't know that he'll ever have like a 20-plus top 5 point per game season, but I think at 7th round price tag, Jahan Dotson can pay off there. And then you have George Pickens. I don't really have a graphic for him, but it's kind of easy to see how he pays off. Like, he's this downfield, big play X wide receiver. He has some like Kenny Golladay, Mike Williams to him, where I think that he'll win you some weeks. I just worry about him ever getting enough volume to reach like a really nice ceiling. I think you can also sort of project him as like 3rd in targets on the Steelers behind Deontay Johnson and Freiermuth, so it gets tough. Kenny Pickett's also he doesn't have a strong arm, and Pickens ran like 30% plus of his routes as streaks in like a really bad Matt Canada offense. So you kind of have to piece things together a little bit more, but some people are really sold on George Pickens' like raw talent. I'm not sure I'm there yet. I think that he kind of just has like flashy passes and ends up being just kind of like a contested catch downfield type guy more than a perennial like 25% target share like wide receiver 1 in fantasy. But again, there's upside for all three of these guys. Just based on their year 2 points per game in my model, they are all priced out of value in the 7th round. I would guess 1 or 2 of these guys end up being pretty big win rate players when it's all said and done in 2023. It's just going to be a matter of picking the right one. Again, this is how I would rank them, but again, I think that I'm kind of splitting hairs. Again, I did my rankings over the weekend on Patreon. I think I ended up with all of them like back to back to back. So again, they're all in the same tier for me. We're splitting hairs. Again, I feel pretty strongly that 1 or 2 of these guys end up being kind of like a key to winning your leagues in 2023. Now, our last guy here is going to be a sleeper. We're looking at the 2022 class again. In terms of year 2 point per game projection, he's not even that high, but I really like Rashid Shaheed, right? He's projected in that same area, right in that like 7.6 points per game as guys like Alec Pierce, Romeo Doubs. You can kind of group him in with Sky Moore. I also do want to put a disclaimer. I know that Wan'Dale Robinson's like, oh my God, he's a massive, massive value. It's tough because it's not going to factor in his ACL stuff, and then also he's like a low ceiling wide receiver where he's like a low ADOT slot guy. So he's not somebody I'm really chasing, Wan'Dale Robinson, even though his value looks pretty crazy at 1.3. But with Rashid Shaheed, he's a similar bet to Sky Moore, Alec Pierce, Romeo Doubs, but those guys all go wide receiver 56 through wide receiver 62. And Rashid Shaheed is going multiple rounds later than those guys, like 12-plus wide receiver spots later than those guys. So I really like Rashid Shaheed. Even though he was an undrafted free agent, he was kind of a monster last year where, I mean, he just was like pretty good. I mean, if we look here at Rashid Shaheed, let me bring up his little play. Look, he doesn't even have a picture on Sleeper. He can't even get the respect of having a picture on Sleeper. But if we look above here, these were the year 2 point per game projections, or the highest year 2 point per game projections for all 5th round or later wide receivers. Now we're making a little bit of an exception for Rashid Shaheed, pretty much bundling him in. I gave him like the lowest possible draft capital in the model. And he comes out as like the 10th best guy, and he's kind of grouped in with some interesting guys where, I mean, I'm not expecting him to be like Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, Antonio Brown, but as like a, like a low-key, like Darius Slayton, Darnell Mooney, Hunter Renfrow, Kenny Stills. Like, I think that those are, sort of paths where you can be these like late round, big play wide receivers be better in best ball for you. I think that there's upside for him to actually be a startable wide receiver, but when he has his weeks, they should be impactful in your flex or whatever. I think that there is upside here. Like he earned volume. He was very efficient last year. He popped in the rookie wide receiver report, which we'll look at right here. I mean, 78.6 PFF grade. He had a higher PFF grade than Christian Watson. 18.1% targets per out run was better than Jahan, Dotson, and George Pickens. 2.59 yards per out run led the entire class. Like, he was efficient. He looked really good per PFF. Everything's there. He's never going to be like a 25% target share, like wide receiver one type guy. Again, that's kind of what we're talking to ourselves. Or, you know, we're not going to find that in the 14th round, Rashid Shaheed. But what we're going to find is like a guy who's efficient. He can do a lot without that many touches. And to me, he's just as good as a bet as those other late round guys, as like Romeo Doubs and Alec Pierce. Like, you have to really tell your story. Like, I think even like way better than Tyquan Thornton to me as well. Like, look at Tyquan Thornton down there. Alec Pierce was bad. Romeo Doubs wasn't great last year. I mean, Romeo Doubs is okay with that 20.5% target per out run, but Rashid Shaheed, like multiple rounds cheaper than them. And I get that he's an undrafted free agent, so they don't have a lot tied into him, but I'll take that discount every day. He's also getting positive reviews again, which, like, I guess you can kind of take these with a grain of salt, but this was a tweet from Underdog NFL. Rashid Shaheed expected to be a bona fide starter alongside Michael Thomas and Chris Olave. Shaheed operated primarily out of the slot in 3 wide receiver sets, and plan is to work him more there this season with Olave and Thomas more on the outside. So he's already kind of expected to be playing in 3 wide receiver sets for the Saints, which is kind of all we can ask for. Michael Thomas isn't super reliable. Derek Carr is a serviceable quarterback for fantasy points, right? Like, we've seen him make like Hunter Renfrow relevant. We've seen him make even like Mac Hollins for stretches the last like couple years. I think even like Nelson Aguilar too. So it wouldn't shock me like that Nelson Aguilar, like I think that was 2021 that Nelson Aguilar was good for the Raiders. It wouldn't shock me to see Rashid Shaheed do something similar where he's a good spike week guy, probably a little bit better in best ball like in these underdog drafts, but he's still somebody that if he's going to go 14th round, I think that he's interesting there. Now, that is going to do it for us today. Again, I just want to put a big fat disclaimer. This year 2 projection model is not gospel. It is not, you know, this holy entity. It is just something that I did as a side project earlier this offseason. I just wanted to show it to you guys, make some conclusions. If you guys want to say, you know what, this is a unfinished product, Ron's not even putting this behind a paywall, why should I really care about this? You can say that, but I think that there are some actionable conclusions here of guys that are probably a little bit underpriced this early in the offseason. Year 2 wide receivers are going to get steamed up, so I thought I would give you guys 6 breakout candidates before they get steamed up. So as always, if you enjoyed, subscribe, leave a like, use promo code Ron on Underdog, and I will see you guys in the next one.
I got the juice, I got the juice.
Channel, Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoenaed for misdemeanors. Dreamer, held back asses, Loki still a deer. And I still shake a bull squat.